So I'm working out of so many different scriptural passages in this sermon that to take you through them would be like half the sermon. So I'm just going to need you to pull out a Bible and go with me places in this sermon when I ask you to. There's Bibles in your pews, by the way. You can get up and get one if you need to. We don't frown upon movement around here, so if at any time you feel like getting up and getting a Bible and you can't do it right now because that song just has you blitzed out, it's all right. You can get a Bible at some other time in this service. All right, so somebody who's got a smartphone and is quick with it, I'm looking at you. You didn't bring it? He almost lied to the pastor at church, but he didn't. Good thing, good thing. I want you to look up the word quantum, okay? And somebody over in this section over here, look up the word entanglement. Because we're going to unpack quantum entanglement. We're going to look at the definitions first. And then we're going to go into some other stuff. So, what does quantum, the word quantum, mean? I thought that too. That's not its first meaning. That's not its primary meaning. Hi, Daniel. Happy birthday. Oh my gosh. Oh, okay. Not. Okay. So if my reading of that this morning is a little different than yours, I thought it just meant like portion, quantum by itself. Is that what you got? A quantity or amount. We're going to stay with that one. Not that you failed. We love you. Okay. It's all right. It's all in church. It's all in church. Many meanings, many paths, right? Okay, so entanglement. So over here we had quantity or portion, correct? Entanglement. What do we have over here? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to pull entwined and togetherness out of that, and I'm going to pull portion. The question that I'm wrestling with today is what is the portion? What's the portion of our intertwinedness in community? How entangled are we really? It's a big question, right? And it's not a new question, actually. The Apostle Paul wrote about this thing. Before I go into the Apostle Paul, it's not even just a question for me of how entangled are we, to what degree entangled are we, but are we a unified whole of entanglement? Can we exist without each other entangled? Is that a part of what it means to be the body, to be church? Right? This is the question I'm asking. So Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 12, just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot would say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear would say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? This is about diversity. This is also about dependency of the parts on the whole body, yeah? If the whole body were hearing be, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as God chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many members, yet one body. Yes. I think I just got a message on Facebook, which means that I did not turn my ringer off. Sorry. That happens sometimes in church. All right, so the body, many members. So there's diversity and there's what? Dependency. To what portion, How dependent are we on each other, and why? So there's all of this scientific kind of worldview that's emerging right now about the fact that what we've been sold in terms of what it means to be a human being or what it means to be a planet is actually a bill of goods. That, in fact, we're not just individuals, but that we are composite entities and that we are contingent. Now, that may not be news to any of you. Like, you all may be like, oh, duh, I am dependent on the people who make my cereal that I eat in the morning in order to feed myself, or I'm emotionally dependent on the people in the pews to feel comfortable enough to mourn, that kind of stuff. But it turns out, actually, that a lot of people don't come from that kind of worldview where we are all contingent upon each other, dependent on each other. And I think to the degree that we ignore that, we do damage to ourselves and to each other. But that's actually not what I'm interested in talking about today. I'm actually talking about people like who are aware that they are contingent upon each other and dependent on each other and thrive because they're willing to admit that. Like, what would that kind of community look like? That's what I'm interested in exploring today, all right? Okay, so you know that movie with that cute little boy and Bruce Willis and the term, I see dead people. You remember? What was the name of that movie? The Sixth Sense, right. So before that blockbuster craze, you said the Sixth Sense, and people didn't think about that movie. They thought about this other thing, which is like the literal sixth sense, right? So it's this special, intangible, quick to be dismissed sense number 6. The first 5, sight, smell, hear, touch, taste, require 2 things. They require the material object being sensed and the material subject sensing. Yes? It's really not hard. I see you, you hear me, we smell cereal in the morning because we live in Battle Creek. I touch the pulpit, we taste coffee when we drink it. So those are the first 5. There's a subject, there's an object, and something gets sensed. It's easy enough, right? But it's not so easy with sense number 6. The only thing that I think makes the sixth sense concrete is the appearance of absence of its object-subject relation, connection. The subject sensates, but what exactly it's sensing can't be easily pointed to or understood, right? So it's often described as this non-knowing kind of knowing, right? A suspicion, a gut feeling. So the literal definition of the sixth sense is that it's a power of perception beyond the 5 senses, that it's something of the intuition. So y'all know this phenomenon, right? You're being about your business, and boom, somebody that you think about calls you right that second. Like, you think of it, and they're on the phone, yeah? So you're off work, and instead of taking the regular route home that you usually do, you take a side street, and this person that you've been needing to check on is out raking their leaves. And, that never would have happened if you would have taken the normal route home, right? The weather looks okay outside, and so it feels silly not to go for your daily walk at the park, but your gut is telling you not to really strongly. You listen to that, you stay put, only to watch this really threatening lightning and thunderstorm ensue. You think about your best friend or your kid or your sibling, and that's something that you do all the time, but one day it's not this like normal kind of thinking, right? You just can't get them out of your head, and it kind of feels like anxiety, only to find out later that they were in some kind of trouble. And we're hoping that you would come take care of them, right? So in all of these cases, there's something between subjects and objects that's going on, perhaps on the inside, but perhaps on the outside simultaneously, and it just can't really be explained. But it's too coordinated it's too coordinated to be coincidental, yeah? It's a little too patterned to be pointless. So I work in the realm of the spiritual, and I can tell you the sixth sense belongs to us. All right? Doctors, they can't tell you about it. Scientists try to. Human behaviorists also make an attempt. But it's so slippery and hard to pin down that those who need tangible data to render something real will always scoff and bump up against the reality of the sixth sense. But here, in the work of spirituality, this language of not knowing, of gut feeling, perceptive power, and intuition fits like a glove. We believe this stuff may be hard to describe, impossible to pinpoint, and silly by the world's standards to rely on, but here it's as real to us as the resurrection is. I not only think there is a sixth sense, but I believe it was created by God, functions for God, and our world would be a lot better if people learned how to pay more intentional attention to it. I think we deny and dismiss the sixth sense to our peril, because at base, I think it's our spiritual radar. It lets us know important information. It is no less capable or valuable than our other five. So think about it. Our other five senses serve a distinct purpose, right? Or they serve distinct purposes. So let's take smell, for example. We smell certain things and make direct conclusions about what we should do or shouldn't do based on that sensation. Eat this. Don't eat that. Kiss this. Stay away from that. Clean the cat litter. The pasta is ready to be served. The diaper's full. Something is burning and I'm in danger, right? You with me? So that sense alone, just that one, gives us information that then we take into direct action, and sometimes life and death action without question. But when it comes to the sixth sense, we question, we hesitate, we doubt ourselves, or dismiss the stimuli and focus, the material at hand. We hardly ever give ourselves permission to take spiritual action based on our intangible sixth sense. And I think one of the reasons we do this, or one of the reasons we don't give ourselves permission to exercise the sixth sense, is because almost everything in the Western world, from science to religion, from sports to nature, is rendered through the lens of what's known as material reductionism. Okay, that's a big fancy word, and that basically means that we see things as individuals, merely as a sum of their parts, capable of operating entirely on their own. We see things as isolated, including ourselves. We have been taught this view by our culture. It is hardwired into our Western ways of thinking, ways of being, ways of perceiving, and ways of doing. So let me give you a few examples of this. So you've heard probably a lot about how Michael Jordan is like the best basketball player of all time, yes? But how often do you hear about the team who played alongside him? Hardly ever, right? I mean, we know he played for the Chicago Bulls, but can you name someone other than Scottie Pippen that played on that team? Probably not, right? So we don't remember teams as sensational. We remember individual record-breaking stars. But stars on teams, and any of the athletes in this room know that, are only as good as their teammates, because they aren't operating athletically in isolation. Another example of this, outside of the sports world, in the church world. So when we've had a particularly powerful and moving worship service here at Koinonia, we will often see people on Facebook like lauding Trisha's singing or loving on my preaching. But Trisha and I can tell you without a doubt that the receptivity of y'all in the room, the way you take us in and respond to our songs and our sermons, has way more to do with our singing and preaching than is ever given credit. Our quality is contingent on y'all. Why? Because we are not separate from you. Not in this body. So this is where the sixth sense starts to make really practical application sense to me. And while I might get highly technical for a moment, I beg you to stay with me, because this scripture from Matthew from the Beatitudes about blessed are those who mourn will be comforted makes brand new sense to me in light of scientific explanations that drive home spiritual truth. So there's this man, he's a scientist named Rupert Sheldrake, who has come up with this concept called morphic resonance. Say morphic resonance. So it's possible that I've preached on this before, but it's a concept that has dramatically shifted my understanding of myself and others, and so I come back to it a lot, and I hope that because I talk about it a lot, y'all will start thinking about it too. So morphic resonance is a telepathy type of interconnection between organisms, between beings, that happens when a field that coordinates their influences on each other activates in such a way that those organisms act like a composite whole instead of as individuals. Do I need to read that again? Yes, okay. Yes, Romans 12, go ahead, baby. Morphic resonance is a telepathy-type interconnection between organisms that happens when a field, all right, when a field that coordinates their influences on each other activates in such a way that those organisms act like a composite whole instead of as individual actors. So think about birds flying north, all right? That's a composite whole. One acts, the others instinctively follow suit without hesitation because their internal sense is in such direct communion with the others. Yeah? You've seen that in the sky, right? Okay. So when we are part of a composite entity, things like our family, our church, a military cell, a staff in operation on a project, a sports team on a court, we are embraced and extended all around by what this scientist Sheldrake calls a morphic field. Okay? A morphic field. And within that field, we are not just ourselves, we are a unified whole that thinks and acts instinctively as one. Morphic resonance is that impulse toward unity, toward oneness, toward seamless communion. We often experience it as a sixth sense. We have been taught to dismiss those impulses because we think they're happening just inside of us, when really they might be operating around us, between us, and through us. So what does this have to do with Matthew and from the Beatitudes? So open up your Bibles and go with me to the 5th chapter in the Gospel of Matthew. So there's this sermon that Jesus is preaching, and on the 4th verse of this, you'll see that he says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Notice that he doesn't say, "Blessed are those who mourn," because somebody might come around and make them feel better at some point. This is like, if you mourn, you will be comforted, right? So I want you to bookmark that if you mourn, you will be comforted. This is a promise that Jesus is making, okay? It is like clockwork for me as a pastor when I sit down with someone who is grieving, that they will give me all the reasons under the sun that they shouldn't be grieving. None of you have ever done that. None of you have ever apologized to me for how you feel when you feel sad. Well, maybe only once or twice, or like 200 times. But anyways, so like clockwork, I'll sit with people who are grieving, and they'll tell me all of the reasons why it's so selfish for them to be focused on their loss when the rest of the world is so full of chaos and worse, sadness. They'll say that, it feels scary to lose control, and so they're not grieving, and it's been 5 years since I've lost so-and-so, and I don't know why. I'm not over it. It doesn't seem right. I feel silly. I feel stupid, this kind of thing. Right? It's clockwork. Clockwork. I do it myself. I think of all the reasons why it's indulgent, right? Why it's self-centered. Why everybody else's lot is worse than mine. So who am I to go into this deep well of mourning and grief inside of me? You do it too. I think the only people who don't do it are Missy and Shauna. And my guess is that's because they've lost enough people in their short lives that they've figured out the futility of repressing grief. But that's my conclusion, not theirs. The point being, the repression of mourning and grief is widespread. But that widespread repression of mourning and grief is also why we are so bad collectively at comforting each other. Why? Because we are part of a composite whole. And when we see other people suppressing their grief, we think, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. But when we do that, we rob people who are inherently posed in the moment to comfort us of their capacity to comfort. It's a cycle, right? Yeah. So I'm not talking about fixing people. I'm talking about comforting people. There's a difference, right? True grief, if you've got true grief, that comes from true love, and there is never a way that that grief is leaving you. It's never getting fixed. But a source of grief, a broken heart, a crying soul can be comforted. In fact, I would argue that that's one of the main functions of faith communities is to comfort those who mourn. Jesus says it, bind up the brokenhearted. And in true Jesus fashion, I think that's why he's saying to us, mourn. You will be comforted. It's a promise. So I'm going to put forth here that the Beatitudes, and specifically this direction, is about deliverance, how we deliver each other in community. If somebody mourns, somebody in the community is going to deliver comfort. All right? So if all of us are operating on our spiritual game by paying attention to and acting on our sixth sense, we become the deliverers of God's promise right here. There will be a pull within us, a lure, a yearning in the form of influence to move, to gather around, to place loving, consensual hands on the heavily burdened shoulders, to lighten the load, to sing from a place of soothing, to pray for peace and power and release, which in and of itself will bring release. And the person who is mourning will be comforted. In this model, we don't wait for God to do something. We become God doing something in the whole, to the whole, for the whole. Okay. We don't wait for God to do something. We become, when we are actively working from that sixth sense, we become God doing something in the whole, for the whole, through the whole, by the whole. It's God's deliverance playing itself out among us and through us, from beyond us, but within us and all around us. So I want to be very clear that this has very specific behavioral implications in our families, in our faith communities, in our places of employment. If you see yourself as a part of a composite contingent whole and begin paying attention to your sixth sense as a means of participating in that whole faithfully, you will be moved to act. All right? You will be moved to reach out and to stand back sometimes and to provide comfort sometimes, to play along sometimes, or to place boundaries, all of that. So here are two very immediate suggestions that I want to make about how to pair up that action with ethics. If we are in a field that connects us and there's a lot of intuitive information abounding within that field, let's let the amount of communication match, if not surpass, that intuition. Okay? Because there are other people involved and egos can so easily misguide us, it's important to check out the impact of our sixth sense and to move from humility when we've got morphic resonance going on. So for instance, instead of, I feel like something's wrong, how about, you're on my spiritual radar and I want to check in. See the difference there? Instead of assuming someone wants a Kleenex or a hug or a physical presence next to them, ask, do you need comfort and how can I provide it? That empowers the other. Instead of giving yourself full credit for being the sensing something ahead of time, I just knew it. Try, God has prepared me for this. Or the still small voice suggested this might come to pass. Obedience and reverence. Acting and checking it out. Intuition and giving credit to the source. So here's the second behavioral implication for us as community. So if we acknowledge that we are in a morphic field together and that the comfort we deserve is in some of us to give, and the mourning that ignites that comfort must actually happen in order to ignite the field, we got to be willing to mourn and grieve. Like fully. We have to be willing to mourn and grieve fully. Because if you're in pain, and I have the capacity to comfort you, and you don't let me see that pain, how will I know? If we're walking around being busy, trying to pretend like we don't have stuff going on, how can we ignite the community to respond to us so that it delivers us this comfort that Jesus has promised? It works together. You can be a person one day, mourning, and you can be a comforting person the next day. God is that good. That's how that works. But if we're in the business of repressing, none of it works. None of it. I don't have a snazzy closing to this sermon. That's it. Amen.